in the cell is where the gene was turned on. Something's wrong there. So this is what I teach. We can downregulate the genes. We can upregulate the cellular detox pathways because, by the way, that is where real detox is.
All right, welcome to the Healing Reset podcast, a place where we aim to provide hope and true healing from chronic suffering by talking to experts on how to treat your whole body system, not just your individual symptoms. Contrary to modern day belief, your body is designed to heal. Today, we have on Dr. Dan Pompa. Dr. Pompa wears so many hats, you guys, but currently he's sought after as a speaker, a trainer of physicians, and an educator on the importance of implementation of cellular detox. We have crossed paths a few times at SOPMed conferences, and I've seen the impact you have made in the integrative community and really appreciate it, especially in terms of your cellular healing program, which we'll be chatting about today. So welcome, Dr. Pompa. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I love your whole family, and thank you because your family serves in a big way. So I'm always grateful to you all.
Yeah, I'm honored to be in that family. Let's get right down to it. So you are known as kind of like the detox expert. What gives you that experience, authority, passion to speak into the world of detoxing our bodies?
That's a great question. I spoke in Africa once, and I was there and I had a translator, and it was to some world leaders. It was a blessing and to be there. But I got done speaking, and the gentleman who was like the man in Zimbabwe was coming down the aisle at a brief pace. And I thought, oh my gosh, what did I say? Surely it was translated wrong. And he said to me, Dr. Pompa, your authority doesn't come from your years of school, your education, or your intelligence. It comes from the victory God gave you. And I really never understood that completely until much later. But, look, I went through a horrific battle of unexplainable illness, chronic suffering, and didn't know why. And it pulled me from the world I was in to a new world and with a new purpose. Oftentimes our purpose and our passions come from our pain. And in that case, mine did. I didn't choose it. It chose me. And here I am.
Yeah.
My authority is in the victory God gave me, no doubt.
There's so much growth in suffering, and we can relate that to so many different paths in our lives. But you're the one that taught me many years ago the pain to purpose statement. And I've carried that forward because we can grow and we can emerge when there's friction and suffering. And just hearing your journey a couple of different times, it's awesome to see what you've done with it. So talk a little bit more. What did that look like?
Yeah, look, like so many people, right? Started with just bizarre fatigue, and then it became debilitating. And I was training at that time. I was riding 200, 300 miles a week on my bike, training for races and running a busy structural correction chiropractic office. So you can imagine, and two young boys at the time. So a young family, but all was well. And I believe I was at like this perfect shape of my life and all that. And then that fatigue, and then anxiety, and then couldn't sleep, and then panic attacks. And then I was intolerant and allergic to every food I was eating. And what's going on? Then sound sensitive. My adrenals were wiped out. My thyroid wasn't right, although my blood work was normal. How many people that occurs, right? I was doing all the blood work. As a matter of fact, I spent $5,000 in blood work, didn't have insurance to pay for it, and all was normal. That was very frustrating. And I spent many years trying to address my hormones, trying to address my adrenals, my thyroid, only to realize there was an upstream issue, meaning a cause that was there that I just wasn't addressing. I just couldn't figure it out until about 4 years later. And I realized I had chronic mercury toxicity. And that led me to my research and most of what I teach today.
Okay. So someone listening out there is like, that sounds like me. Thyroid, chronic fatigue, anxiety. I've changed my diet. Nothing's working. And when you mention upstream impact, you're thinking there's something deeper. You got to go deeper. You got to dig. But if your blood work looked normal, had you tested for mercury in the past?
It's funny you said that. I don't remember where I was in the journey, maybe a year, 2 years in. And I was online most of the evenings when I couldn't sleep, literally, insomnia, couldn't get back to sleep, whatever it was. And I found Mad Hatter's disease. I don't know if you remember what that is, but people making felt hats, they were using mercury. to attenuate molds, etc. And they became known as Mad Hatters. And I had all the symptoms. I'm literally reading this saying I'm mad as a hatter. And well, I went and got a blood test. It was negative. Matter of fact, in that $5,000 worth of blood that they ran was that test as well. So, but I learned later that it was probably just over a year later, I became very good friends with a very bright endocrinologist with a very natural view of things. And he said, Dan, I think you have mercury toxicity. And I was like, I thought so too. And I ran the test. What test? A blood test. Oh, wrong test. That would be if you were a Mad Hatter, meaning getting exposed every day. I think you would have more chronic mercury toxicity. And so I did a more challenged test, and there I saw enough mercury to think this could be the problem. But you have to be a little careful because even when you challenge it out of your body, what's in the brain, and that's where really my problem was, the mercury that accumulated in my brain from different sources, but that really without a biopsy, you won't test for. But I had enough reflection here that I thought this was the problem. And then it was when I did the challenge test with something called DMPS, I was like, whoa, I got really bad, right? So I knew that I tapped into something. So I knew that I had to figure out how to get this out of my brain correctly, safely. And again, that led to everything that I teach. Because look, first of all, people have a suspicion that they might have heavy metal poisoning, right? And then they do something, they're put on chlorella, cilantro, or some other, do saunas, colon cleanses, those sorts of things. Say, oh, I detox mercury for 3-6 months. Look, it took me years to get it out of my brain, but I did get my life back. And
now, let me just stop you there because you walk through health food stores and you see the marketing behind detox.
Yeah.
It's almost an undervalued word in the Western medicine where doctors don't always seem to recognize that as something that people are struggling with. But then you go and see the new marketing schemes on detox. So when you're mentioning cilantro, you're talking, it's just not a complete binder. Or some of these detoxes that they might do a colon right? They're cleansing, they're pulling stuff out, but it's not actually touching the upstream issue of your brain.
That's right. Exactly. Look, those things that I said, Chlorella is, online is known as the metal magnet. And, almost everybody that thought or thinks they have a heavy metal issue utilizes it in some fashion. But in a Petri dish, in vitro, as we say, it pulls very well. It looks like it would work very well until you actually take it and then it hits your microbiome, and then it becomes a very weak chelator, and one that can actually create more problems, which I call redistribution or auto-intoxication. Cilantro is the same way. A lot of the weak herbal binders are the same way. But keep in mind, I used a real binder called DMPS when I did that test where you challenge out of your tissue, and I got very sick. So you hear horror stories about chelation, which is true. So you have one side that is using real chelators incorrectly.
Now explain chelation to the listeners out there.
Great idea. Chelation means to grab onto, if you will.
So when we talk bind, right? To hold.
Exactly. So chelators grab things, hold on to that, and pull them out of the body. So a weak chelator then would be something that doesn't grab on very tightly and starts to pull and lets go because it's too weak of a bind, and then it redistributes. And thereby, then it can cross the blood-brain barrier and create more problems. Now, real strong binders like the one that I use, DMPS, some of you might be familiar with EDTA, DMSA. These are real chelators. However, caution, you have to use them within their half-life. Okay, what does that mean? So, for example, I did DMPS. It has maybe like a 10-hour half-life, meaning that most of it's gone out of the blood. It pulls a lot because it's a real chelator, and then it goes away. Then what happened to me is I redistributed a lot of that metal, and that's when I got worse.
So it goes away, but it doesn't necessarily come out of the body.
Well, the chelator does, but the problem is when it goes away, it sets up this concentration gradient. The body's still releasing toxins.
Got it.
And then you don't have it there to grab on to prevent the redistribution. So if I would have taken that, if someone would have told me, you have to take it every 8 hours for at least 3 days to minimize that redistribution, I wouldn't have got sick. So therefore, not that you could do an IV every 8 hours, but you can do oral chelators. Now, we've developed other chelators and binders along the way, one called Cytodetox, you're familiar with it. And there's other ones, like I said, EDTA, DMSA. but you have to take them underneath that half-life to keep the levels up in the blood high enough so you don't redistribute. Look, the bottom line is this. You have to use chelators. You have to use them correctly. But I want to caution even one more time, because now we're hitting on all the pitfalls of detox, okay? And we want to keep it simple. But if you don't, you can use all the chelators you want even correctly. But if you don't fix the cell, meaning you have 50 trillion or so cells in your body, and once you get to a very toxic point of a diagnosis, or I don't feel well despite changing my diet, et cetera, your cells are not detoxing every day. If you don't fix that, you're not going to get your life back. So you have to fix the cell to get well. That's my saying, right? So that's a big mistake in our world.
So I often hear people that change their diet. They start doing right things. They go back to their doctor, nothing's changed. And they're like, no, you're still eating the Snickers. But really, it's because we're not addressing the cellular issue.
That's right.
Right. And so when you're talking about that, it's like we can be doing all the right things, but if we are still toxic, it's not going to change our outcome or our diagnosis.
Jessica, that might be the most important thing that we say, because we have right now a world of disease, unexplainable illnesses, symptoms, weight loss resistance, brain fog, low energy, hormone problems, thyroid issues, that even in the functional medicine world, the natural world, whatever we want to call it, they're not really getting to where the problem is. The cause, yes, turns on a gene, right?
Yep.
Whether it be Hashimoto's, the inability to lose weight. But, the message is, oh, you're just unlucky. You have your gene your mother had or your father. But the fact is that you can turn down those genes, but it won't happen unless you remove the cause. And it won't happen unless you actually fix what's broken in the cell. Because remember, in the cell is where the gene was turned on. Something's wrong there. So this is what I teach. We can downregulate the genes. We can upregulate the cellular detox pathways, because, by the way, that is where real detox is. The cell makes energy. When it makes energy, it makes waste. And once you get overwhelmed, I say your bucket is just overflowing. It's filled with toxins and stressors, physical, chemical, emotional. Once that bucket overflows, then what's happening is your genes are getting turned on. Your cells are inflamed. They don't detox. So all the diet changes, people, listen, you can change your diet. You can exercise. You can take the supplements. People are doing those things today without success.
Yep.
Even 10 years ago, people would change their diet and get better. It's not the case today. People would change their diet and lose weight, get energy back. In so many cases, it's not the case today. Why? Because they haven't got to where the problem is, and that's the cell.
So we talk a lot about body burden. And so when you paint the picture of the bucket overflowing, it's like our bodies are fairly resilient until that bucket overflows. Right. And then it's starting to set off these fire alarms of, hey, yes, bring me back to balance. I'm giving you warnings, bring me back to balance. But we keep talking about, your body, your diet. And so for someone listening out there, they're thinking, well, I feel fine. Yeah, I'm a mom of 3 kids. I get tired, but that's because my baby's not sleeping. Or I got some aches in my knees, but I feel fine. Is this applicable to someone who is already living on the side of chronic illness and to someone who is young and feeling fairly healthy? Or is this applicable to just a patient population that's kind of in the trenches right now of autoimmunity, neurotoxicity, you name it?
Oh man, is it applicable? Because if you'd asked me a week before my bucket overflowed and all those symptoms that I said earlier started occurring, I would have said, I'm healthy. There was hints. There's always these little hints that we ignore. Is I'm just getting old. I just trained too hard. I'm just tired. I'm working too hard. I'm stressed out. I'm telling you, we all go through that. But these are the early warning signs of, that it's about to happen. I sometimes in my lectures, so you're going to have to visualize this because I didn't prepare, but imagine if I had 2 glasses of water, one in my left hand, well, it's the video, but whatever, imagine, one in my other hand.
The ring helps.
Yeah, exactly. So if one was right to the edge, okay, it filled with water, the other one will fill halfway, okay? Some of you might be halfway, and you can handle a lot more stress and even more. But if you stress it too much, you'll get some symptoms, meaning the water will come over the edge. However, most of us, we're right at that edge. And just a little bit of stress, and the water starts flowing over, a little bit of stress. And then one day it's just too much damage is done, triggers the gene, and now we're just in that overflow.
Everything's
So
overflowing.
how did I get my life back? I had to get my bucket down, right? To where I could take stress now, right? I can go travel, and I travel a lot, as you know, lecturing, this and that. I have all these things going on because I can handle more stress mistakenly. Many of us are chasing our hormones, chasing our adrenals. I just need more of this. I'm just stressed out. Look, it's not the stress. Believe me, it's not. I'm not saying that stress isn't important or mitigate it. It is. But what it is it's how we adapt to it. We can handle, when our bucket is down, we can handle a lot of stress as humans. We really can. But the problem is when that bucket gets full, and again, any physical, chemical, or emotional can fill that bucket, but we can only empty what we can. And that's typically our toxic burden. And once we get that down, we can handle more emotional stress. Our adrenals recover. My thyroid recovered, right? It's like, me trying to address the adrenals and the thyroid, I wasn't upstream. It was just, they were just getting worn out because of my body trying to deal with the level of toxic stress that I was under unknowingly.
And listening to you talk and listening to you speak, I'm realizing I'm in that same boat, right? Where you're masking symptoms without getting upstream. For my personal story, it's Hashimoto's, and I just keep upping the dose per my doctor.
Yeah.
And listening to experts like you, it's just like there is deeper healing that needs to occur, and my body can bring itself back into balance. And so
Absolutely.
you bring such a good message of hope. I do want to dig into kind of like the main assaults. What are the 3 main assaults to our bodies when it comes to toxicity?
Yeah, when it comes to toxicity, I talk about 3 hidden stressors that I find that most practitioners either miss, or if they do it incorrectly. Okay, so we started with heavy metals because that was part of my perfect storm. And by the way, I want to make something clear. What I find when it's 20 years of teaching this and helping people with this, is that it's never one stressor. It's accumulation of typically 3 major stressors that come together. Do you remember the movie George Clooney, The Perfect Storm?
Yeah.
That's an 80s movie. Okay, I'm dating myself, but that was a really good movie. But it did a great job of teaching people that every once in a while you have 3 weather fronts that come together, storms. And when that happens, catastrophic storm, people die, things, bad stuff happens, right? This is what's happening today. You have 3 stressors that come together. If it's 2, yeah, it can be pretty bad, but 3 turns the gene, boom. And now we end up with the sickness. What I mean by that is you could have an emotional stress, even trapped emotions from a child, right? And then you have, maybe you're living in a moldy home at the time, and then you get one more stress, right? And it could be another chemical stress, it could be heavy metal stress, whatever it is, and boom, the bucket fills, goes over. It's that perfect storm that happens. But the bottom line is, so when I look at this, if I look at somebody's history, I'm looking for these stressors that people didn't see. And if you don't get to even one of them, what happens is you don't turn the gene off. So I use the analogy of a 3-legged stool, right? A 3-legged stool, all 3 legs have to be there, right? So typically it takes the 3 things to get you sick. But if all 3 aren't dealt with correctly, then you don't get your life back, right? So picture that 3-legged stool, and you'll always kind of understand where I teach from. But the bottom line is that once that storm happens, then we get sick. Okay, so the 3 things: heavy metals missed most incorrectly, not missed, but I would say detoxed incorrectly. And we kind of discussed that. Mold. Mold is one that people just don't know, right? They're in a house, they don't smell it, they don't see it. But yet it's and it could be from even past mold exposures. If your basement gets wet, or your house had a past water damage and you just didn't do it correctly, fix it, you might have a mold problem. It's a biotoxin. It devastates your hormones. It devastates your brain and how your cells work. And then last one is hidden infections. Hidden infections from like cavitations, root canals, these things. I'm telling you, they are missed. People think that their dentist looked at their x-ray and said, you look fine, but when you get wisdom teeth out, it can leave 20 years later a hidden infection in your jaw. And if it's not dealt with, That may not be what got you sick, but it could be what's keeping your gene turned on. So those three stressors I teach you have to look at. Now, there's others, but those are the big ones that most practitioners do miss.
So how do we balance that? Walking around living in a toxic world, living in a world where root canals and wisdom teeth are a very common procedure, living in moldy homes they're hidden assaults. How do we balance that as we walk through?
Well, look, I mean, it starts with education, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody is looking to get their life back, or the person thinking like, you know what, I am the person who changed my diet, or maybe the person can't stick to a diet, it's not your fault. Hormonally, once this system, the cells get disrupted, you can't burn fat and use fat for energy, even if you're skinny. But what that does is it causes you not to stick to diets, but the bottom line is that we have to educate people to look a little deeper. Look at your history. Did you have a house that got wet? Were you in a house that potentially might have had mold, or are you now, or a business or an office or a school? Look at your heavy metal. Did you have silver fillings? There's a 50% mercury, and they vaporize mercury into your brain for the life of the filling. Don't believe me. If you Google smoking tooth video, that's a 25-year-old filling. They chose a 25-year-old filling for a reason, because dentists used to say, oh, it's an old filling, all the mercury's out of it by now. Oh no, it will vaporize mercury into your brain. And by the way, if you're someone who said, well, I got my fillings out, the problem is that mercury vapor that crossed into your brain turns to inorganic mercury, and there it's locked for life, unless you do the correct process to get it out of your brain. And you know where most of it goes, by the way? Your pituitary hypothalamus. You know what that controls? Your thyroid.
Your adrenals.
Yeah, and your hormone system. No wonder I was chasing my tail, trying to balance my hormones, when my whole control tower was poisoned. And by the way, I wore contact lenses in the 70s, 80s, and in the early 90s, it was taken out. But mercury was in thimerosal, or in a form of thimerosal, in contact lens fluid. And we were putting it directly into our eyes, which was going into our brain. So another source, not to mention fish, not to mention other environmental sources. But the point was, though, and I was living in a low-grade mold house at the time, and I was training too hard and working too hard. There was my perfect storm, right? I had mercury going into my brain multiple ways. I was living in a low-grade mold exposure, and I was running my body down. Boom. Gene was triggered. Diagnosis is given.
The best thing about this story, Dr. Pompa, is someone listening says, that's me. I'm super active. I wear contacts. I wore contacts in the 90s. I have an active family, a healthy family, but you don't know you're living in mold. You don't know about the mercury in the contact solution that's since been removed. I want to make that point clear. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Early 90s it was out.
And you think, hey, I'm training. I am an athlete, right? This doesn't apply to me. But again, when we're looking at our body burdens, that bucket, we are getting assaulted every single day by things we don't even know. And so it's just looking at the body from how are we detoxing? How are we binding? And then how are we adding in nutrients to help prevent a lot of this oxidative stress? And then thinking through the three-legged stool, right? Where are these assaults coming from? So with that, I want to get into the detox process. But first, I would like to talk about what role does nutrition play in this?
Yeah, look, I think when you look, I always talk about the 5 big deficiencies. Most people aren't sick today because they lack a vitamin. I want to be clear, right? Because we have access to so many good foods. Now, with that said, because we spray our food with a chemical called glyphosate that pulls nutrients out of the soil and the plants, and people are eating processed food, there's some exceptions here, right? But I'll talk about the 5 big deficiencies very quickly. I believe magnesium is one of them. It's being pulled out of the soils. Iodine's another one, which can complicate thyroid issues and other problems. Vitamin K, because people don't, vitamin K2 to be in particular, people don't eat grass-fed meat anymore where it's, in abundance. And vitamin D, people are avoiding the sun, running from skin cancer. And I would say even B12, because of the gut issues, can often be times deficiencies, or some B vitamin deficiencies in that sense. But those are the big ones. Look, people today typically don't lack vitamin C. some of the other vitamins. But, I think when we look at some of the other things that's happening in nutrition, bad fats in the sense of vegetable oil, canola oils, and rancid seed oils, they are in health food stores, for goodness sakes. But what they do is they come in and they go into your cell membranes. They inflame the cell membrane and they impair your detox pathways. They
Now,
drive inflammation.
I once heard that can last for up to 132 days, that damage.
Right.
True?
That's right. Yeah. So one of the dietarily things that I say, look, if you can change your family's meat to grass-fed meat that has the good fats and the right ratios, because grain-fed meat is a disaster. It's loaded with the wrong things and it's loaded with the wrong fats, etc. That's a whole nother show. People are eating all of these rancid fats in the vegetable oils and the canola oils, which those are very important omega-6 fats that go right for the cell membrane. To your point, they drive inflammation for months, right? And that's the issue. And people's diets are loaded. And lastly, processed food, processed carbohydrates, glucose spikes, insulin spikes, glucose spikes, insulin spikes, right? People are eating a processed diet and they're getting those spikes and it drives cellular inflammation. Look, I have to draw this. We probably have listeners as well as viewers, but you can visualize with me if we have listeners. But okay, that's a cell, and I'm known for drawing many of these. I already said that we have to fix this to get well. What you have to understand is that I think most people listening heard inflammation as the cause of most diseases today. But what do we mean by that? What we really mean is cellular inflammation. So this is a membrane around your cell, and it's made up of what we call a lipid bilayer. That sounds confusing. 2 layers of fat that allow the good stuff into your cells so you have energy. By the way, you make energy, and I'll go back to your little biology a little bit. You make energy in the mitochondria. Remember from school, the powerhouse of the cell, right? Okay, that's where you make energy. But you have to get the nutrients, the ones we were talking about and others, in the cell so you have energy. Okay, but when the cell's inflamed, you can't get things into the cell. And that becomes a problem. Oh, and by the way, there's another problem. When you make energy, you make, like, think about when you burn fire or burn wood in a fireplace, you're making energy, right? Well, there's smoke that if your damper's not open, the smoke pours into your home. You and your family will die not of the flames, but of the smoke. Well, think about your cells that way. When these membranes get inflamed, you can't get the toxins out, even from the smoke that you're making from making energy. Now, your question should be, or people watching or listening, what's driving the cellular inflammation? Toxins is the number one cause. Now, I mentioned bad fats. I mentioned glucose and insulin spikes, all drive cellular inflammation, but toxins come in, they make their way. So if I put little X's here, they make their way to that membrane and they drive inflammation. Now you can't get the good stuff in. You can't get the bad stuff out. You don't have energy. Your brain doesn't work. Your digestive system starts to fail. All the bad things start happening. You're not detoxing. Oh, and in the cell, you have the nucleus. Now I'm going back into your biology, but here is where your DNA is. Now, guess what happens when you can't get toxins out of the cell? You trigger genes. Now,
which brings us back to the epigenetic conversation, right? So we have some control over the expression of our genetics.
Absolutely. So you can turn down the autoimmune, you can turn down the gene, whatever it is, but we have to do it at the cell. We have to fix the cell to get well. More specifically, we have to detox the cell to get well. And I want to point one more thing out of why I struggle to fix my hormones. On every membrane, you have these things called hormone receptors. Think of them as control towers. You could buy $1,000 cell phone, and if you don't have a tower to connect to, you do not talk to your friend. You don't get your message through. Doesn't matter if you're in the middle of the desert. So these little control towers, cell phone towers, if you will, on the cell membranes, that's how your hormones work. So I use this one for you. That's T3. That's the active form of thyroid hormone. It has to attach to that cell phone tower or that hormone receptor on the cell membrane. Then it gets its message into the DNA and the mitochondria, and you have energy. You burn fat for energy. You feel great. But what if inflammation is blocking that hormone receptor and it doesn't get its message in? It doesn't matter how much hormone you take. You said something earlier. You said your doctor keeps upping your dose.
Yep.
Because what's happening is if you don't get to the cause of what's keeping that hormone from getting its message in the cell, you're going to keep needing more and more hormone to the point where it doesn't matter anymore. And your doctor's going, hey, your blood level looks okay. Well, of course, because they're measuring blood out here outside the cell. So the hormone level looks good. But if it can't get its message in here, it doesn't matter if your blood's normal. That was me. They were testing my thyroid, my hair's thinning, and I'm going, I know this isn't working right, but your blood works normal. Now, 10 years down the road, it would have probably went out of range. And then they would have given me a hormone, made my blood work look normal, but my cell was the problem. What was driving the inflammation?